If you would like a free newsletter on this or other subjects, just give us a call at Christian Answers. The phone number is area code 512-218-8022. That's 512-218-8022. Or you could email us at cdebater@aol.com. That's cdebater@aol.com. Thank you.
A long time ago, at a time unknown, in a place that no one has ever seen, somewhere on the subcontinent of India, walked Ganesh, son of Shiva, the god of destruction, with his mother, intending to take a bath in the clear, cool pond in the middle of the jungle. Unbeknownst to Ganesh and his mother, his attackers and enemies waited in the bushes. As the lad entered the pond, his attackers pounced upon him and lopped his head off with the sword. His head disappeared, and his mother, in frantic rage, looked about her. Spotting an elephant in the distance, came and chopped the head off of that elephant, replacing it on her son. From these humble beginnings would grow Ganesh, the god of insurmountability. Any problem could be overcome by praying to Ganesh, who is now remembered for time immemorial in granite, brass, and golden idols. Krishna, the blue one, the flutist, the eighth incarnation of Vishnu, who would come to the earth at times when religious fervor had faded, coming at a special time to speak with Arjuna, to show him the new way to salvation in the epic, the Bhagavad-Gita. Krishna and Ganesh are two of the pantheons of Hindu gods.
Greetings and welcome to our program. I'm Larry Wessels, Director of Christian Answers, and the answer I have for what you've just seen and heard is found in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 19 and following, which says, "Do I mean then that a sacrifice offered to an idol is anything, or that an idol is anything? No, but the sacrifices of pagans are offered to demons, not to God, and I do not want you to be participants with demons. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons too. You cannot have a part in both the Lord's table and the table of demons." Well, with that, we open our series on the world religion known as Hinduism. We're going to get into the different aspects of Hinduism, their gods, the history of it, and things of this nature. And we hope it will be an enlightening and informative program for you, a series of shows that will open your eyes to a world religion that has many hundreds of millions, if not maybe over 1 billion adherents, with the influence of the concepts of Hinduism being felt here in America as well in different philosophies known as like the New Age movement or so forth. There's many variant forms of this type of religion and the underlying assumptions that go with it, such as karma or reincarnation or other things of that nature. But we'll save all that for just a moment. With me today in studio, I have two very special guests that are joining me here to help our studio or help our audience out there learn more about this subject and how we as Christians should deal with this very ancient religion known as Hinduism. And first of all, I'd like to introduce my first guest here, Steve Morrison. Steve, it's great to have you here, brother. Steve, you have a Bachelor of Science degree from the University of Texas. You also have a Master of Science degree in Chemical Engineering from the University of Houston. Boy, I remember those chemical engineers. I I don't know how you were able to stand it all, but that's a lot of brain work, brother. But you were actively involved with the Austin Chinese church. It's kind of like a Bible church, you might say. You've been involved in ministry to cults and world religions now for over 14 years. And in fact, one of your credits, although it's not really apropos to this particular show we're doing here, but you've even had the honor of teaching a Bible class for a Unification Church meeting, which if anyone knows the Moonies, that would be quite a, I think it was only a one-time deal, though. Yeah. And of course, you're also a PhD candidate right now in your formal studies here at the University of Texas, I believe. So you've had a lot of background in dealing with cults and world religions, and it's just an honor to have you here, brother. Thank you. And our other very special guest is Mark Casse. Mark, you're from San Antonio, Texas, joining us today. You've got a Bachelor of Science from Creighton University out of, I hope I pronounced that right. Is that right? Creighton?
That's correct. Creighton
University out of Omaha, Nebraska. You've got a doctorate in law, so you're a lawyer. Folks, I don't know if you need help. I don't think lawyers are supposed to advertise on TV, but it sure comes in handy when you're dealing in forensic debate, let's say, when it comes to world religions, differences between Christianity, Hinduism, or other forms of different types of religions you might run into. You attend Harvest Fellowship in San Antonio. It's sort of like a kind of a non-denominational type Bible church organization itself. You teach apologetics.
That's right.
What kind of apologetics do you teach? And give me a little more information on that.
We have a Wednesday night class at Harvest Fellowship, and we teach Christian apologetics there, defending the faith, defending the Bible, defending the inerrancy of Scripture. And we've just gone into the cults now, so we're discussing cults and world religions. And I'm also an instructor of apologetics and world religions and cults at International Bible College in San Antonio, Texas.
All right, and I understand also that you're not a stranger to doing cable access television. You've been part of a television show, I think, called God's Army.
That's correct. It ran weekly. It's running for the past 6 months anyway. I'm not sure where we're at with it now, but it was an apologetic program in which we were basically defending the faith on several issues: evolution, different world religions, different world views, and basically, again, defending the Bible.
And now, as we come to this topic of Hinduism, do you have any personal experience when it comes to this religion of Hinduism?
Oh yes, quite a bit, firsthand.
Well, could you tell our audience about it?
Well, my wife was a many generation, as far back as you want to count, Hindu, who converted to Christianity. So she is the lone Christian in her family, and the rest of her family side is all Hindu. And so I've had encounters with many of them, plus also being involved a lot in the Indian communities here in Texas, in San Antonio, in Houston, and lots of people that are my clients, and coming through the Bible College as well, since it's international in scope. So I've had quite a few dealings with people that are of a Hindu background.
I understand also that your mother-in-law happens to be visiting right now. Is that true?
Yes, that's correct.
And she's where does she call home?
New Delhi, India.
New Delhi, India.
That's right.
And is she a professing Hindu?
That's right.
And
she would probably be your classic Indian Hindu as far as the majority of the population is concerned, because most of them are not educated to the same degree that we would look at in the United States. Most of them do not have college degrees, etc. You've got a huge population in India, and most of them are your traditional Hindus that have picked this all up by word of mouth.
I see. Very good. And so here we are, the three of us today. We're going to be talking about classic Hinduism and the ramifications and all of that. But just to tie this in just briefly on your mother-in-law again, who, in your opinion, is representative of a lot of the people in India
right.
in their belief systems. So as we talk about classic Hinduism and the gods and the doctrines of Hinduism and stuff, what I'm getting from what you're saying is that it may be similar to a lot of people here in America who profess to be Christians of some sort or another, but they're not all that familiar with, let's say, basic Christian doctrine, In fact, I just read a poll last week in a Christian newspaper called Christian News that reported they did a nationwide poll of people who profess to be born-again Christians. And of this nationwide poll of born-again Christians, somewhere around 30% of these people that claim to be saved, evangelical type born-again Christians, 30% of them said that Jesus had committed sins. Which is, you know, that kind of was a shocker to me, because you usually think those kind of people wouldn't have such faulty doctrine. And so what I'm doing is I'm basically tying this back into, I guess it's like this around the world. I've dealt with a lot of Muslims. They don't really know the Quran that well. Here in America, people don't know the Bible that well, yet they claim they're Christians and things. And so in India, in Hinduism, you get a lot of people that really don't understand all the ramifications of the religion they profess.
That's correct. And like I'm saying, that's the general population in India, which is going to differ from the Indian population in the United States, because those that are here in the United States are generally professionals or have some sort of degree. Now, that being said, most of them are not scholars in the Hindu religion either, and they will hold to many of the same beliefs that you'll find in the villages and small towns of India.
I see. Well, with that stated up front, I'd like to move here for the viewing audience to Steve here for a moment. Steve, the viewers here at home are seeing all three of us, the whole setup here, and they're seeing this map back here of Asia and so forth, Africa and whatever, and then some very colorful photographs underneath. And just take a little while here and maybe get into a little the history of Hinduism, maybe where do we find it mainly in the world, and just say what you think would be a good opening statement for our viewing audience who have no knowledge of this subject.
All right, sure. Well, the majority of the around 600 to 800 million Hindus live in India, though you see Hinduism spread out here, and you see some Hinduism in America. To really understand Hinduism, you need to step back and understand a little bit of history of how it got started. Now, there were 5 great ancient world civilizations that all started close to the same time. Most people know about Egypt, which was kind of got civilized around 3000 BC. And then the Sumerians, which were about 3500 BC, and of course Abraham came from there. And way over here there was China, which had written records from about 2000 BC. But another one that often is not talked so much about, at least in American history books, is the Dravidian culture, which was centered here and kind of spread south through India. And another one that was not really known about until fairly recently was the Aryan civilization. And the Aryan civilization was a little bit east right here. Now, first we'll talk about the Dravidians. The Dravidians were very highly educated for their time. They were kind of like the masters of city planning, and they were the only civilization, for example, that had toilets. Okay, and so these people, they weren't particularly warlike, though they had some fighting, but they had a pretty high level of civilization in all these cities and a fairly peaceful culture. This other civilization, the Aryan civilization over here, was this is a very dry area, and they were pretty much experts on irrigation. And many of these people, 1500 BC, they migrated en masse for reasons that we don't know, and they conquered India right here. Some of them, all of them did not go though. Some of them stayed behind, and some of them later went into Iran, and some of them later went into what's now southern Russia. And anyway, the ones that migrated into India, you can read some about that conquest in the first Hindu scripture called the Rig Veda. And they talked about these towers that they saw that reached up to the skies. And these guys had horses, well, they had better horses than they had. And they had carts, which were maybe like four-wheel chariots. And they come and they basically conquered everything. And Hinduism started as a religion that would keep the light-skinned peoples, that is the Aryan conquerors, in a mastery of control over the dark-skinned, what were called dasas, which today we would call Dravidians. And the very first reference that we have to the caste system is actually in the Rig Veda. In the Rig Veda, in Book 10, Chapter 90, verses 11 and 12, it says, "When they divided the man, into how many parts did they apportion him? What did they call his mouth, his 2 arms and thighs and feet? His mouth became the Brahman, that is the highest caste, the Brahmin priest. His arms remained to the warriors, Kshatriyas. His thighs were the people, that is the Vaisya, and from his feet the servants, his Sudras, were born." And so the Rig Veda justifies basically what's apartheid. You know, you thought apartheid was just in South Africa, but by a different name, it was practiced in India with these 4 major castes. Now, originally they were 4, but the castes, they multiplied, and so within the 4 castes, you have all these subcastes, and that's how you got the caste system. That's how you got many of the trappings of original Hinduism.
All right. Mark, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, along with the caste system, you have to understand, too, how this fit into the religious system of the day. Basically, as Steve already mentioned, the caste system was set up for the express purpose of keeping the Dravidians under the hand of the Brahmins. They wanted to maintain this. So not only could they come in, and it wasn't a system of slavery like we would find here in the United States. This was a religious-based slavery system in which they had specific duties that were set up in each of the castes. So like Steve had mentioned, they cut it up into the bodies. The Brahmins would be the priest caste, or the head. They would be the people that would be the next in line to go up into the all, or to reach this state of nirvana. Then you would have, as he said, the Kshatriyas, which were the warrior caste, or they were represented by the hands. And thirdly, he mentioned the Vaishyas. These were the professionals, or the skilled workers. And finally, at the bottom, you had the Shudras, or the slaves, and even beneath them, you would have what were called the Harijans, or in street terms today would be called the Bungis. These are the untouchables. These are the people that would go around the countryside basically cleaning up the messes that were made after cows and other animals went through the farms. They would do the dirty work. Nobody was to touch these people. In order to work your way into this dharma, or this works-based series of salvation, one had to go through their caste system by performing the duties, and guess who was the one, or the class, that got to assign the duties? The Brahmins, of course, those that were the light-skinned people that were on the top. So we have to understand that a lot of people have heard about the caste system, and today they look at India and say, well, I don't see anybody by the last name of Brahman. As history went on, people that belonged to these different castes had family names. So now, if you want to know what caste a person belongs to, people from India will know by your family name, because family names became so incorporated into the caste system. And while Mahatma Gandhi did work to overthrow the caste system in principle and on paper, it's very much alive today in India, though not for the same reasons anymore. Now it becomes a matter of discrimination, and it's not so much for doing your dharma or your duty so that you work through your caste and move up in your next life into the next caste.
I see. Well, so what we have here is a caste system. We've got these different levels. I know it's almost like Greek to a lot of people, just hearing all these different names, you know. People just can't relate it in the American culture straight off. But would you say we've got this basic caste system you mentioned? We've mentioned how a lot of people have an ethereal idea of what Hinduism is and stuff. But would you say there's just a lot of different beliefs in India concerning Hinduism? Is there different, I guess what I'm asking is, are there different types of Hinduism? Is there, you know, like here in America, there's all kinds of brands of you know, of Christianity. Well, is it like that in Hinduism? Is there this brand and that brand, you know, one's a special brand and another one's, you know, I don't know. What do you have to say about that, either one of you?
Well, talking with a Hindu friend of mine, he basically described Hinduism as an ocean of belief. Or you might think of Hinduism really not as a religion, but as a menagerie of different religions that all claim to be the same, that are very different. You have to look, first of all, at early Hinduism. In early Hinduism, in the Rig Veda, they mention the sacrifice of cattle, of all things. They also mention the horse sacrifice. They also drank this plant called, juice from this plant called soma, which was kind of interesting. And there was no mention at all of Krishna or many of the modern Hindu gods, and Indra was the supreme god. Later on, it kind of became more philosophical in the time of the Upanishads, and they talked more.
What year are we talking about on the Upanishads?
Upanishads about 800, 600 BC and on.
And you mentioned that other chief god before it evolved into something
was
else.
Indra.
When was, do you have an idea when that was in time?
The Rig Veda, we don't know exactly when it was written, but you might say roughly about 1400 BC. And the other Vedas, now these were written over hundreds of years. It wasn't like one guy sat down and wrote everything. And we don't actually know who the authors are. Okay, but the Upanishads kind of said, well, behind all of these many little polytheistic gods, there was this great unknowable kind of Brahman. And it was a very kind of impersonal thing to kind of think about this Brahman. And then later, these other sects kind of spun off that might mention a personality cult almost to Krishna, with the Hare Krishnas and reading that through the Bhagavad-Gita. And one thing that needs to be said is that many Hindus would not consider Hare Krishnas a part of Hinduism. Now, Hare Krishnas would tell you that they are, and so there's kind of a debate about what's a Hindu. And for purposes today, I will just define a Hindu simply by somebody who says they're a Hindu. So I won't jump.
Make it simple.
I won't jump in the middle of that. But realize that the Hare Krishnas say you shouldn't read any Hindu scripture except for their version or their translation of the Bhagavad-Gita. And there are other Hindus who actually say that the Bhagavad-Gita is not a Hindu scripture. So when you want to say this is what all Hindus believe, there's really not a whole lot you can say.
Well, it's just similar to Christianity in our vein. You've got like the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints with the Book of Mormon, the Jehovah's Witnesses or whatever. You know, all these people claiming to be Christians, and one guy says, well, you're not a Christian, and the other guy says, no, you're not a Christian. But, you know, and it seems like Hinduism has the same kind of deal. You've got those inside, almost like cults that pop up, I guess sort of like in Islam. You've got the Baha'is who come out of Islam, and the Orthodox Muslims don't, you know, say they're like not Muslims and are cultists, and you get a lot of infighting sort of like that, the same situation in Hinduism.
Yes, there was a Hindu, I guess, sage named Sankara, who around 800 AD attempted to standardize Hinduism, but basically he just founded kind of another sect, and but a lot of people joined that sect. So there is a lot of disagreement about what is not true about Hinduism. Is Indra the supreme god? Is Krishna the supreme god? Is Brahman the supreme god? Is somebody else? You know, should Vishnu be worshipped? Should Shiva be worshipped? You know, different Hindus will give you different answers to that. Or should the 330 million local deities, are they the ones that you should spend most of your time worshiping? You get all different kinds of things. So if you're going to talk to a Hindu, you need to kind of say, well, what kind of a Hindu are you?
Mark, any comments on that?
You have to understand that as you make this comparison between Christianity, the history is so different. Christianity began as a monotheistic religion, and it has remained a monotheistic religion. Here what we're talking about in Hinduism is you had, as Steve mentioned earlier, you had the Aryans who were a pantheistic religion, coming from the Greek word panta, combined with theism, which means all is God. They worshiped the nature, just like the early Greeks did. They had the god that he mentioned already, Indra, and they had the god Varuna, who was the god of the fire, etc., and these different gods that were all given to the names of certain natural elements. When they came in, the Dravidians were already polytheistic in nature, not pantheistic. So what you had was the combination of the two of these religions, okay? And from them, bits and pieces, as Steve has mentioned, like an eclectic combination was formed. And so you went through several reforms, and Steve mentioned some of them. When you came into popular Hinduism, which is what you have now, it really sprouted out. You had Buddha shooting off to the left here. The Hare Krishnas are basically a 20th century creation that has come about very recently. But even back at that time, the Buddhists split off from them. That was a sect that came out of Hinduism. You had the Sikhs that split off. They came out of Hinduism. All of these different groups came out of there. Now, the amazing thing is that while Hindus claim that they're a very tolerant people, they will accept any religion as being true. For example, the Hindus will see Jesus as being the God of the white man. So it's okay for you to worship Jesus, but we have our own gods. There's a God for everybody. So basically, polytheism took over, and you've got this mishmash that's very difficult to understand between all being God and, like Steve mentioned earlier, 300 million gods, the God of the week, two gods for each person that comes along. And then, of course, with the scriptures, as you mentioned, well, you have the Mormons breaking off and the Jehovah's Witnesses. Each of these groups will appeal to their authority, which would be the Book of Mormon, for example, the Pearl of Great Price, or the Bible, whatever it might be, or with Reverend Moon and the Divine Principle, etc. With the Hindus, they don't have an authoritative written work that they can appeal to. Steve mentioned that this took place over hundreds of years. The writings took place, and it wasn't, like we find in the Bible, a compilation by several authors. Rather, what we have is that it was an oral tradition that was passed down not over 10, maybe 20 or 30 years before it was put in writing. We're talking about over hundreds of years, passed on by word of mouth. Somebody would add something here, somebody would add something there, and we can't go back and find these writings. We can't go back like we can with the Bible and date it back to a certain period of time and find these writings. We can't go back and find any archaeology to support what we find in the Vedas, particularly the Bhagavad-Gita, which takes place in the mind of Brahma, or the all. Now tell me where I can go find that geographic location. See, we can't substantiate with extrinsic evidence anything that we find in Hinduism. And as for popular Hinduism today, they're not going to go back and say, well, cite me chapter and verse from the Gita, or cite me chapter and verse from the Rig Vedas. Basically now, the Rig Vedas and the Gita have taken on more of a traditional type usage, much like a hymnal would in a church, where you would repeat the hymns to your gods. And so there's a lot of distinctions that have to be made. The whole history of Christianity is entirely distinct from this. This is, I can't think of another movement in any other world religion that even mirrors this, because of the major world religions, many of them sprung off of Hinduism. So I think that's important to mention those differences.
Yes, very, very true. Now, before we go on this, I'm just getting kind of fascinated here, because just listening to you guys go after it, you know, hopefully everybody's understanding why you're on the program today. Y'all definitely, well, you even, you know, your own family being involved with Hinduism, you know, obviously know it very well. And with that in mind, Mark, let me ask you, because I know this is, there's a lot of people at home now who've been exposed when Steve was showing the map, but they've also seen all this colorful photography, or whatever you want to call it, down below, artistry or whatever. And if you could, for a moment, Mark, or however long it takes, kind of take us through this pantheon and maybe give us a little feeling, as you all been explaining about 300 million gods and all this type of stuff. Could you maybe explain what we're seeing here? And let me ask you, just out of curiosity myself, why is it? Is it just tradition? But it seems like when I see Hindu art or something related to Hinduism, it's always very colorful like this, and it appears similar. How come we don't see something that was maybe closer to, you know, Japanese artwork? I mean, it always seems to be something like this when it comes to Hinduism. Is there a reason why they make their art like this, or?
You see a lot of gold in there. That's the first thing. And their gods and the people that they hold in high esteem have a lot of gold, because that's one of the benefits. As contradictory as it seems to taking this ascetic lifestyle, is that you will gain wealth and pleasure in this life too. So you have contradictory theologies within the same thing. But the reason is it's a show of status. He who has the most gold obviously is of a higher stature.
Oh,
so what we have over here on the left is basically, it could have been used as a cover for the Bhagavad-Gita. That's Krishna standing there with Arjuna. Krishna is the one standing up there, and Arjuna is the one kneeling down before him. This is basically the story that unfolds in the Bhagavad-Gita, in which the bottom line is that one should not start looking to things of the world to find satisfaction. One should not look to wealth. One should, and here's the contradiction, of course, one should not look to pleasure, and that one should turn away from that and seek wisdom. And the greatest wisdom can be found through practicing yoga. And the best way to practice yoga is to worship Krishna. So this is the theme that you're going to find throughout the Bhagavad-Gita. And there are different interpretations of the Bhagavad-Gita. As Steve mentioned before, the Hare Krishnas use one, which we showed at the beginning of the show, which is called the Bhagavad-Gita as it is. That was by Swami Bhakti Vedanta. Bhakti, by the way, means worship. Bhakti Vedanta. And if you look in there and compare that to the traditional Gita, you'll find that some of the words have been changed to emphasize Krishna even more. Now, as we go over to the right, what you'll see is a pantheon of some of the more popular gods in India. Up in the left-hand corner there.
On this end here?
Right, if you could point to that, Steve. That is Lakshmi. This is the word faith god of the Hindus. Name it and claim it. If you need wealth, you pray to Lakshmi. And she, of course, will provide you with that wealth. Standing next to her, we saw the idol earlier of Ganesh, and he is the god of overcoming.
Oh, he's the elephant head.
He is the elephant head, and he has several arms. I'm not sure why they have several arms. Again, I think that's a status thing. Then we get over to the middle, and that's Krishna giving you the high five there. And that symbol on his hand is the Om. And the Om is a chant that's used during yoga, which is supposed to be symbolic. It's supposed to be at the same wavelength as the cosmic consciousness. And when we discuss the theology, that will become clear to people. Okay. But he is the 8th incarnation of the Brahma. The Brahma is this impersonal being, and there were 10 incarnations. The 10th one has not appeared yet. That would be Kalkin. Buddha was the 9th. And directly below, if you go straight below, you'll see Krishna again. Krishna always has a flute. I'm sorry, the god on the top is Rama. Excuse me. Rama is the 7th incarnation. Krishna is the little boy with the flute, yes. Okay. And then down directly beneath him. Rama is the one on the top. I apologize for that error. He is the 7th incarnation of Brahma. Then as we get over to the right, we again see Lakshmi. And you'll always see her adorned in jewels, flowers, with money at her feet. And then we see Ganesh next to her, and Saravati, she's the goddess of music, playing the guitar. And then if we go down to the next row there, there's a little boy carrying 2 baskets on the left far end there. And he's not as popular. I don't know that much about him. His name is Sabuar Kumar, and I'm not sure what the story is about him. And then again we get Krishna. And then we get Vishnu over on the far right, with Lakshmi sitting in his lap. And then down in the far left-hand corner, you have the monkey god, Hanuman. And Hanuman is a very important god to the Indians when it comes, if you look at the map up there, you'll see that Sri Lanka is right beneath India. And there's a lot of rivalry between Sri Lanka and India over the myth that's associated with Hanuman, and that he freed some Indians that were supposedly taken by this other evil god over to Sri Lanka, I think it was by the Tamils. And they'll have a big celebration about that. And so the Sri Lankans don't really like Hanuman a lot. Then you have Krishna, of course, and here is Durga on the right, and she slayed the demon buffalo. And of course, she has many hands to help her with that too. Durga is also known in her alter ego as Kali, which means black, who's the goddess of death. I don't have a picture of her there, but Kali usually adorns herself with skulls, human skulls.
Yeah,
I've
seen some of those pictures.
And there's a long tongue coming out of her mouth, and she's got a bouquet of other things symbolizing death all around her. And she is the alter ego of Shiva, the destroyer, the consort. So you got Durga, who can become Shiva, and they are all tied in, or I'm sorry, Durga, who can become Kali, and they're all tied into Shiva.
Now, I don't know if this is a bad correlation or not, but it just strikes me as you were mentioning all these gods, how you could pray to, the word faith God or different gods for different purposes, but it kind of reminds me of how a lot of people pray to saints, St. Jude or Saint. Is this similar? Is it similar? You pick a god that you need something from?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, or even as they pray to God, as they see him, And
right.
You don't just have to limit it to saints. You could do it as deceased ancestors, or even as they pray to God. And generally, how the worship takes place is that in India you have a temple, and in the temple there's a little bell, and as you ascend the steps you ring the bell. And when you ring the bell, you're welcoming the god to come down, and I'm not sure if he inhabits the statue or what happens. I haven't got a clear answer from any Hindu on whether or not the god lives inside of here, or whether or not the god is asleep at the time they ring the bell. But anyway, you bring the god down, and then you welcome him, and you do what's called a puja, which is a worship. And through this worship, you repeat these Sanskrit verses, and basically you're welcoming him here, you're asking him to have a seat, and then you scrub his feet and wash him, and then you offer, as Steve talked about earlier, a sacrifice. Now the sacrifices these days aren't cows and horses anymore. Now you'll get like a bowl of rice or some fruit or something like that. And there's a little guy that lives in the temple. He's called a pundit. He's the caretaker. So after all of this has been offered to the gods, then the caretaker who comes and scrubs the statues down and makes sure that they're shiny and well taken care of, he then gets whatever was offered to them as a sacrifice to eat. Mm-hmm. So that's how he makes his living, kind of, by taking care of these idols. Nobody's going to pay for it, but then he'll get some rice or whatever may be the case.
So would you say, like in India and a lot of places where Hinduism is prevalent, there's a lot of statues?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
I've often heard, I remember when I was in elementary school, way back in time, remember how one of our teachers had said she had gone to India on her vacation, and she said there was a whole lot of statues over there, but she couldn't show them to us because they were dirty statues. And I was just a little kid, I didn't really understand at the time, but is this really the case? Is there a lot of like obscene statues, and how does that tie into the religion of Hinduism?
You can go to any art museum in the United States that has an international exhibit, and depending on what you call dirty, I mean they're nudes, if you want to consider that to be dirty. The female statues always accentuate the bosoms, and one of the gods is in fact a phallus. That would be Shiva. So anytime you go to a major museum in the United States that has art from India, you're going to see Shiva, who is actually a phallus. So if you want to consider that to be...
Well, how does that tie into the theology of India? Why do they do that? Is what I'm asking. Is there an underlying reason for having something like that in this particular religion? Does it tie into the fabric of the theology?
It's all myth. I mean, this ties in more to the myth than the theology of it.
Okay.
And we haven't really touched the theology. We've just gone, right now, we've hit some of the...
I'm just trying to tie in, I'm trying to get a fix on that because, you know, as a child growing up, I always had this stereotype from my instructor talking about, well, there's a lot of statues and idols over there, but they're dirty, and I didn't know what the meaning of that was.
Literally dirty. It's a very dusty place.
Oh, yeah.
Well, also in India, there is a sect of Hinduism, which is Tantric Hinduism, which they engage in sexual practices as a part of their worship.
But that's just another, like, offshoot group.
Yeah, and
it's not to be taken for the whole...
Yeah,
as a form of yoga, actually, Tantric yoga.
Okay.
And he's absolutely right. It's almost like having an orgy.
Yeah, but that's actually a fairly small group. But there is another group that worships primarily Shiva, and I guess the male side of fertility and procreation. And there's another group that disagrees with them and says you should worship primarily the female side. And so some of the and those are I guess more.
So they look at God as sort of like a dualism, a male and female type of situation, or?
Yes and no. Some groups look at it as primarily male, some primarily female. Some even talk about Shiva in almost a hermaphroditic sense, about male and female. Okay. And so pretty much whatever option you could think of, there's probably somebody in India who looks at it that way.
So when we're talking about Hinduism, we're talking about polytheism for one. Lots of gods, as Mark went through in detail here on these particular gods. Now, you know, there's stereotypes, and I know in popular American culture, one of the stereotypes dealing with this whole concept of Hinduism is, well, we talked about the statues and the idols, but we also have heard about how people worship cows as if they're sacred cows. That's even a slang term or a cliche in this culture. How do, well, you've got all these mythical gods, the mythology, excuse me, that we're talking about, but how does Hinduism relate to cows and living objects? Are we saying here that in Hinduism they can make people and like cows and animals gods as well? Or how does that tie in?
Where the cow came from. Originally, the cow was not a god. Okay, in fact, Steve mentioned that earlier. They sacrificed the cows. The cows were very important because they were almost like money. They were a medium of exchange, and so they gained this sense of importance. But
almost like it grew up in its own animal caste type system.
Yeah,
okay.
that would be a good analogy. And what we're dealing with here then is the concept, of course, of reincarnation. And the Hindu theology states it's basically monism. All is one is all. So everything is this great cosmic spirit that's called the Brahman. And within this cosmic spirit, you have souls that are being released from the all at a certain time in history. You have a finite number of souls because they're all eternal, so you can't keep adding on to the group. And they're released from the all, from the Brahma, and they enter into this cycle of life, which we'll be talking about in another program called reincarnation. And everything that lives and doesn't live has part of the Brahma within it. So like in Christianity, as we see very clearly, the creator is separate from the creation. In Hinduism, you have this what's called monism, where the creation is the same as the creator. It all just kind of evolves out of it. So whether you have a rock, or whether you have a piece of grass, or a stalk of corn, or a human being, all of them have their own soul, which is really part of the all. And this soul is on its trip through what's called samsara, or the wheel of reincarnation, trying to reach this state of moksha, which is release from the wheel of samsara, back into this eternal state of bliss, of recognizing that one is one with the all. And if this sounds very familiar, it's because this is the same New Age concept that's being peddled through dozens and dozens of groups in the United States today.
Do you have anything you'd like to add to any of that, Steve?
No, that's exactly right. One thing that I should say, though, is that in talking about that the Hindus sacrifice cows, I recognize that may be a shock to many Hindus. They say, no, Hinduism certainly isn't that way. So I probably should have said the source so that the Hindus can look it up for themselves. And the source for that is in the Rig Veda, Book 10, 85, verse 13. And also on the horse sacrifice, that's in the Rig Veda, Book 1, Chapter 162, page 10 to 12. Now, some Hindu commentators have tried to make the horse sacrifice be some sort of mythological kind of or mystical thing about a man named Horse. But the trouble with that particular interpretation is when they take an axe to the ribs of the horse, then that seems kind of pretty clear. And when they cook the flesh, and when the gods are waiting for the flesh, that doesn't sound like just a spiritual meaning, you know. So they did actually have that horse sacrifice, which there's a whole hymn about that, and as well as that cow sacrifice.
Okay, now you mentioned, and we've talked about this a little already, but I'd like to get a little more clarification. The Rig Veda, the Upanishads, the Vedas, could you just re-clarify that just a little bit more? So you're just saying this is a compilation of a bunch of writings by who knows who, going back in time, and people just suddenly accept them because it's traditional. Is that what we're dealing with? And what's the difference between the Upanishads and the Vedas? Just time? Okay. Is that the difference?
No. There's a big difference in content. All right, first of all, they accept those works. That doesn't mean that they've read them. A Hindu friend told me that, you know, probably if half the people in India are literate, of the literate ones, maybe only 10% have ever read the Upanishads. Okay, but the Rig Vedas, they accept them as scripture, but they predominantly, but they have never, for the most part, they don't agree with everything that is in there. And the Rig Veda and the other Vedas, the Yajur, the Samar, and the Atharva Veda, they don't really talk about modern Hinduism. They talk about early Hinduism. And they were written around, we don't know exactly when, but around 1400 BC up through about 800 BC.
Give me just a quick example. I mean, we're talking about it, but what exactly do you find in there? What are some specifics out of let's say, the Rig Vedas that you would find? If I just were to open one up and start reading, what kind of concept or what would I be reading? What would it say?
Well, for one thing, you'll find about this plant named soma, which was a hallucinogenic drug where they made out of it. We're not exactly sure what it was. It was a leafless vine, though it possibly could be perhaps a fungus or maybe even a mushroom. And just an example, I'll just read the entire Book 10, Chapter 119 of the Rig Veda. Says, "Yes, this is my thought. I will win a cow and a horse. Have I not drunk soma? Like impetuous winds, the drinks have lifted me up. Have I not drunk soma? The drinks have lifted me up like swift horses bolting with a chariot. Have I not drunk soma? I'll turn the prayer around in my heart as a wheelwright turns a chariot seat. Have I not drunk soma?" And then it goes on and on just to say about how great he is from drinking soma. And he says, "I am a huge, huge flying cloud. Have I not drunk soma? I am a well-stocked house carrying oblation to the gods. Have I not drunk soma?" And the Rig Veda is not laid out in a logical way. And a lot of people would have a difficulty, I guess, understanding it if they look at it from just a Western mindset. But I think the key to really understanding it is it's not meant to be logically consistent. It's not meant to be coherent. And parts of it, and now this is my own opinion now, may have been written by people who were under the influence of soma.
So this is a key point here. You're telling me that in basic Hindu philosophy and in literature here, you really can't approach it from a Western mindset of Aristotelian logic.
Right.
You have to be ready to accept irrationality, contradiction, things that really don't make any sense, and just make what you can out of it. Is that what we're talking about here?
Yes. For example, Indra, Brahman is Indra. Brahma is Agni, the god of fire. Brahma is everything. Yet, Brahman talks to Indra. Brahma teaches Indra something and Brahma kind of sets the gods of fire and wind in their place. Now I'm saying Brahman now, okay, not Brahma is a different god. I'm talking about Brahman. All right, so the fact that one thing can be everything and yet can talk to things, can argue with things. If Indra is supreme and if Indra is in all things, yet Indra can have a dispute with the Maruts, and Indra can kill a demon, and yet that demon is part of Brahman, Indra is part of Brahman. So it's like, well, if you look at through Western mindset, you say, boy, this just doesn't make sense in the regular predefined categories. Well, maybe it wasn't supposed to make sense in a Western sense.
What do you have to say to that, Mark?
You have to understand the Rig Vedas preceded the Upanishads. Just to make it a real easy distinction is to make is the Upanishads are like commentaries on the Vedas.
Were they written by like Hindu priests or something?
They're written by whoever. We don't know who the authors are. There's no way to trace it back.
You're just suddenly accepted by...
Well, not suddenly. These are stories that circulated, and they were accepted and then written down, and who knows what they changed, because we can't go back and find a paper trail like we can, for example, with the biblical scriptures. So you've got philosophies. That's basically what it is. It's a series of philosophies from whoever, and it accreted during time. You get through 100 years, and somebody would add something else, or something else would get added onto it, and finally, you know, it was accepted in its written form at this point in time, and for whatever reason, that we really don't know what the history is, and Hindus don't know what the history is. They don't need to accept it, because Hinduism relies on two things. When we get into morality, it's relativism, ethical relativism and cultural relativism, all of this based on blind faith, okay? Let me give you an example of this. I was in Houston, and we were eating at an Indian restaurant, and one of the guys in there came in, and we started talking about moksha and samsara, and he was the owner of the restaurant, it turned out. And so I started asking him about his belief system. As Steve said, there's so many different kinds of Hindus that you can't just put them in a box and say, this is what you believe. You really have to sit down with the Hindu and ask him what he believes or her. What you're going to find out is that most Hindus don't even know what they believe. They go through a series of rituals that they've always done because this is what they were taught. And when you bring these things up to them, especially when they're here in the United States, you have the advantage that Hinduism is an unlivable worldview, because it says there are no absolutes. Okay, relativism. Of course, we know that's self-contradictory, because that in itself is an absolute statement, so we know that's a self-contradiction in and of itself. But as I was talking to this guy and getting out of him what he really believed in, the bottom line was, he was telling me, we believe in these things because the Guru says it must all be by blind faith. I said, you know, that's very interesting. You've got a restaurant that you're running here, and in this restaurant, you've got to get all kinds of supplies for it. So let's say you were going to buy 30 pounds of rice. Are you just going to go out to the guy and say, here's $30, bring me 30 pounds of rice whenever? He said, of course not. I said, why not? Because he might not come back with the rice. Okay, so what are you going to do? Well, we're going to write up a contract. I said, you're going to write up a contract over 30 pounds of rice? Of course. Why? That's the way we do business. Okay? So I told him, well, look at this for a minute. In your day-to-day life, you write up these contracts because you don't know. You're not trusting by blind faith in your day-to-day life. Yet for eternity, you're willing to risk your entire eternity on blind faith without even thinking about it. Now, if that in fact is the higher way, if this in fact is a principle which is coming out of your belief system that you can apply to your day-to-day life, then why don't you live what you really believe? Because you can't. You see, he had to admit at that point that he had never looked at it that way before. That's true. The important things in my life I don't base on just blind faith. Rather, I think through them, I write contracts out, I do whatever I have to do to ensure myself. I said, don't you think maybe you should take another look then at eternity and what's going to happen after this point in time? Don't you think you should spend at least as much time looking into the facts and the evidences about that as you are looking into the facts and evidences about 30 pounds of rice? And you see, this is the entire Hindu concept. They don't use anything for authority because experience is the highest authority. Whatever your experience is true. This, of course, this comes into a lot of problems. Of course, the classic problem with polytheism is what happens when you have Lakshmi over here telling you one thing and Krishna telling you something else. Who do you listen to? You know, and the same thing with experience. I have an experience, you have an experience. Where do we find truth? They're not interested in truth, and because of this, there's no interest in truth. Hinduism is such a hideous system, and Larry, I think this needs to be brought out. This is such a hideous system because underlying all of the glitz and the glamour, underlying all of this thought that there's tolerance and great love and devotion for the earth and devotion for fellow man and all of this, underneath it lies a complete absence of the seeking of truth. And so what we end up with is that he that can pull one over best on his neighbor is most highly esteemed. Truth is thrown to the wind because experience has now taken its place. And on top of that, we have a system that's based on karma, which we'll get into again when we talk about reincarnation. But karma is basically, for those of you who might have heard, well, I walked into this room and I felt some bad karma coming off of this guy. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about in this system, as you go through the wheel of life, through the samsara, you go into a different body, or if you're in Western reincarnation, it's always a human. In Eastern reincarnation, it could be going down to a plant or something like that. The idea is that you want to reach this state where you are unconscious and impersonal. And in order to do that, you've got to get rid of all of the baggage, which in Hindi is called maya, or illusion. All that's around us in the created world is actually just an illusion, and we're almost like thoughts in the mind of Brahma. We don't really have an existence except for our souls. So in order for us to get free of this wheel of reincarnation, we've got to get to the point in Hinduism where we can understand that we really are one with the all, or we are God. Okay? Here you have what you're seeing in the Word Faith movement, what you're seeing in Mormonism, what you're seeing in the New Age movement. It all came out of Hinduism to begin with. So as you're going through these cycles, when you do things wrong, you collect what's called karma. And you have bad karma that you have to work off of your system in order to shake free of this so that you can go up to the next stage in your next life and work your way back up into the all. So because you have this karma, you don't care about anybody else. If somebody's lying in the street bleeding, you don't want to mess with them, or if they're starving, you don't want to mess with them because that's their karma. And if you mess with their karma, they're going to have to come back through the wheel again and do it all over again before they can recognize their divinity. So you don't want to interfere with anybody. This is why, Larry, India is one of the most impoverished nations in the world. It's a third world nation, and Hinduism has kept it there. This belief system. Now, there's a lot of people out there that are saying, well, I might be a Hindu that I'm watching this show, and I don't believe that. I help people out. Well, we're talking about now classical Hinduism, and we're talking about Hinduism as it's practiced in India. And if you're very honest and you're a Hindu that's watching this show, think about it for a minute. There really are stereotypes that you place on other people based on their last names because of their castes, and you will not intermarry with them, and you will not associate with certain people like this, and you will not accept a dowry from them because they're in the wrong caste. This is the same principle that I'm talking about with karma, which is why India is in the situation that it was in. Now, of course, you've had reformers such as Gandhi and his family coming and pulling them out of this. But we have to understand what Hinduism does. It's not just the idols, Larry. And as you mentioned in the first video, where is this worship going? It's not going to the statue. It's going to the demons. Satan is the father of all lies. The Bible tells us that very clearly. And what we have going through here is not only a deceiving worldview in which they believe truly that there are these many gods that they can go to for whatever their selfish motive might be. You don't try to align yourself with the will of the gods. You go to them to get from them whatever you can get from them in order to make this life more pleasurable. But you're talking about a system that has no problem with lying and deception, and a system in which there is no forgiveness. When a person is not able to forgive, a person is in bondage emotionally and spiritually forever. You can't get out of that bondage. And this is why Christianity and Jesus Christ offer the Hindus something that they can't find. Jesus is not the God of the white man. And I tell so many Hindus this. He's not the God of the white man. In fact, if you looked at the map, Jesus was born in the Middle East. Now, point out on that map how close that is to India. A few thousand miles from India. How far is that from the United States and Western Europe? A long way. Jesus Christ
Off the map.
walked the earth much closer to India. He was not a white man, he was a Jew. And you see, the only way the Hindu can be freed of this bondage is to recognize, hey, I can't forgive, and to be honest with themselves and say, which they're not being, I've got this vacuum in my life. I've got this hole in my life. It hurts because I really don't know true love. I don't know what it means to be accepted unconditionally, and I don't know what it feels like to really be free of my sins, because the only examples I see are these so-called gurus who tell me that they're free of all of their sins, and then I see what they're doing on the side, and I really have to wonder about that. You see, Jesus is not the God of the white man. And so I think we really need, at this point, to go into what is the gospel of Jesus
Well,
Christ.
I agree, and I want to just play on, or hit on one thing you said there at the beginning of your excellent discourse, and that was the fact that you mentioned they don't know what truth is. There's, it's all relativism. If everything's relative, there is no truth. Truth is whatever you want to make it out to be, but then if it's everything, it's nothing. And the thing we're talking about here is that from our perspective, Christian worldview and the gospel of Jesus Christ is the truth is found in Jesus Christ, that He is the truth. He is the way, the truth, and the life. And no man can come to the Father except by Him. And so with a couple of minutes left here or so, Steve, could you tell us a little bit more about how Christianity is so much more superior than all this relativism and deception that Mark was just elaborating on?
Okay. Yes. In the Upanishads, there is actually a place to where Prajapati, the teacher, deliberately taught deceptive doctrine to Indra and one of the demons. And this was a deliberate deception that's shown in the Upanishads. In contrast to that, Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Okay? So if Jesus is the way, and in Hebrews it says that God cannot lie. So we believe a God of truth, and a truth that is real truth, not a contradictory kind of thing that can change with the wind. It can be right today and wrong tomorrow. It can be right or wrong depending on which sect. We believe in the absolute truth. And if you will give your life over to Jesus, He will free you not only from a non-existent cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, but He will free you from all of the bondage that you have, whatever culture you might be, so that you can just come to Him and you can die to these laws that say that you have to, whether marry within a certain caste, whether you have to seek wealth or seek pleasure, or whatever it is you're seeking. If you could seek the true happiness, then and the only way to find that is really be by seeking God.
And Mark, would you go ahead and make some final statements here too?
Yeah, I'd just like to say that if you're out there right now and you're watching this and you're trapped in the system of Hinduism, you know exactly what I'm talking about because you grew up with it and you never thought about it. You never questioned it. But you always knew that deep inside of you there was this vacuum. There's this hurt that's inside of you. I want you to know right now that Jesus is not the God of the white man. Jesus is the God who spoke and the entire universe came into existence. He created the ability to come up with these ideas of Krishna. Krishna claims He's the only God. Jesus says He's the only God. This makes one of them a liar. And what I would do is ask you to look at the evidence. How do we know that Krishna is truly God? How can we tell that Jesus is truly God? Merely looking at the Bible itself and comparing that to some of the works that we've looked at can demonstrate to you beyond a reasonable doubt that the evidence is there. The evidence that Jesus actually walked on the earth. He was seen by over 500 men after His resurrection. Krishna never rose from the dead. Brahma, Vishnu, none of them ever rose from the dead. Ganesh received a new head, but never rose from the dead. Jesus is the only one who has lived the perfect life that you couldn't live, and then died a death that, if you think about it, there's no way that you can work to gain back through all of the meditation, through all of the yoga, and all of these things for every bad thing that you've done. Jesus paid that for you on the cross, proved that He was God by rising from the dead. And now He's offering you salvation, eternal life, in one time around as a free gift. An absolutely free gift if you'll just trust in Jesus Christ.
All I can say to that, brother, is amen. Well, I want to thank both Mark and Steve for joining us today on Christian Answers. I'm Larry Wessels, Director of Christian Answers, and if you have any questions regarding this show or would like more information, just give us a phone call or write us, and we'll be glad to respond to you and help you in any way we can. Well, we'll have to sign off for now. I want to thank you for being with us. Join us again next time. God bless you all.
check out our websites. BibleQuery.org. This site answers 7,700 Bible questions. HistoryCart.com. This site reveals early church history and doctrine, proving Roman Catholicism is not historically or doctrinally viable. MuslimHope.com. This site is a classic refutation of Islam, a counterfeit religion created by Muhammad. Free newsletters are also available.